Hey yo, how's it going everybody? I hope that you are all doing very well today. Today I'm going to be sharing my experiences and also my personal opinion on a pretty common topic of discussion amongst the car community. And that is whether or not you should buy a newer V6 or a older used V8. I'm of course referring to vehicles that are trying to do their best impression of Chris Bumstead. The joke is muscle cars. For points of reference, I'm going to be using my experience when I owned my previous 2023 V6 Dodge Charger GT and my current 2014 Dodge Challenger SRT8. Everyone has a very different opinion on this particular discussion, and everyone's got drastically different experiences as well with these vehicles. I'm purely going to be speaking from my experiences and giving facts based off of what I have experienced as well, owning both vehicles. And if you're asking yourself the exact question that's currently in the title of this video right now, giving some information that might be helpful in your research. Or if you're just sitting there eating dinner, or maybe you're on like a lunch break at work, or whether or not you just sit here watching all my videos, kicking your feet up late at night, then here you go. Anyways, enough of the jibber jabber. Let's go ahead and start off by giving a little bit more background into my experience with both of these vehicles. So as I mentioned previously, prior to owning the Challenger that I currently drive, I had a 2023 Dodge Charger GT. I had bought this from a dealership with about 500 miles on it, and while it wasn't exactly brand new, because I bought it like late into the year of 2024, it essentially was new mile-wise. I had owned that car for about 7 months, and in that 7 months, I put around 7,000 miles on it. Now, moving on to the vehicle I currently own, which is a 2014 Dodge Challenger SRT8. This model is the SRT8, which was back in the day the top of the line model that you could get. It was basically kind of like the Hellcat before the Hellcat was a thing. But I got into this car and it had about 53,000 miles on it. And I have now also owned this one for around 7 months. And I have put just around 5,000 miles on it as well. I owned both of the vehicles for around the same amount of time and drove relatively the same amount of distance as well. And in my time driving both of these vehicles, I have experienced a multitude of different things that will lead into the next thing I was going to talk about, which are the pros and cons of both. So to start off, we're going to go ahead and talk about the pros and cons of my previous 2023 Charger. Starting off with the pros. The first pro of the vehicle, obviously in comparison to a V8, was the better gas mileage. The gas mileage wasn't crazy on the thing. Like obviously it's not going to be anywhere near the comparison of like a Prius or a Corolla. However, it did get pretty decent gas mileage, and most of the time I was rocking around 17 to 20 miles to the gallon. And when I did do road trips in that same vehicle, I got around 25 to 26 miles to the gallon, which is pretty decent, and it's not the absolute worst. And another pro about that particular Charger was the upgraded technology. Since it was a 2023, it was fitted with 2023 technology. The navigation system was amazing in that vehicle. There was a gigantic amount of settings in the vehicle that were able to be changed, a lot of different customization options. If you want to learn more about all of the customization options, you can go ahead and check out my review that I did on the car, where I go through all of those things a lot more in depth than what I'm talking about right now. Speakers were amazing in the vehicle. Essentially, the technology was very good in that vehicle. Another pro that comes with owning a newer V6 is obviously saving on insurance. Obviously, you will still be driving a sports car under their way of doing whatever they do in the insurance companies. However, most of the time, you are going to obviously be saving a lot of money when insurance is trying to insure something with a smaller motor that doesn't make quite as much power, because they see something with a gigantic motor in it and think, he gonna go vroom. Anyways, that is going to do it for the pros of owning a newer V6. Now, I'm going to get to some of the cons, and like I said, just from my personal experience of owning a newer V6. First con that I will be pointing out is, ironically, also the first pro that I pointed out, which is the gas mileage. Now, while the gas mileage is better in comparison to the majority of V8s out there, it also isn't by that far. As I mentioned earlier, usually I was running around 17 to 20 miles to the gallon during city driving. However, There was also a lot of points it dipped below that. There were a lot of points where I saw that car dipping around 15 to 16 miles to the gallon. And I know this is also partially because the one that I owned had the all-wheel drive system in it, and it wasn't a full-time all-wheel drive, it was only part-time all-wheel drive. Which basically means the all-wheel drive only kicked in under certain circumstances that the car decided. So basically, the majority of the time I was in rear-wheel drive with some heavy-ass axle up front, making the car way more and putting a lot more stress on an engine that didn't necessarily have the power to compensate. Not saying that that motor couldn't handle it, but it just made it work a lot more than it really needed to. Obviously, this is also just because of the fact that that had that all-wheel drive in it. I know with a lot of the SXT models, which is the base trim level, gas mileage is a lot higher just because when you're rear-wheel drive, you don't have that axle up front. So maybe there is a bigger gap in the gas mileage difference with the SXT. However, from the GT that I owned, it wasn't crazy in comparison to the gas mileage that I will talk about later that I get in this thing. Another con of owning a newer V6 is obviously the motor. Motor that comes with the base models of the Charger and Challenger, being the SXT and the GT, is the 3.6 liter Pentastar V6. That motor puts out around 292 horsepower and 260 foot-pounds of torque. While that is a lot of horsepower in comparison to a lot of other cars, these vehicles also weigh a lot. With these particular models, you're going to be pushing around 4,000 to 4,200 pounds before you have all your luggage, children, bays, baby mamas, wives, granddads, eighth cousin-in-laws, like before you put anything else in the vehicle, you're going to be pushing around 4,000 to 4,200 pounds around. And with that motor only having around 260 foot-pounds of torque, it can seem very sluggish. Now, like I said, the overall horsepower and torque behind it isn't necessarily bad. However, combining that with the weight of what these cars weigh, it's going to affect the performance a lot. And not only that, it also is going to affect the aforementioned gas mileage on the vehicle as well, because that motor is going to have to work tremendously hard to push one of these things around, only having around 260 foot-pounds of torque. Another con about newer V6s is obviously being that they are the base model of these cars. You're generally not going to have the best build quality all around, which usually means that things like suspension, brakes, features on the interior are usually going to be substituted with things that are a lot cheaper. Because they're the base model, they are more mass produced, and when you mass produce something, you're obviously going to try and find more cost-effective ways to be able to produce them because you have to produce so many of them. And overall, not to say that the build quality is horrible in the base models, but it will just be lesser to what you would get in the higher trim levels like the RT, Scat Pack, and SRT. Anyways, that is going to do it for the cons of the newer V6. Now let's go ahead and move on to the pros of owning an older V8. And just to mention it once again, I'm going to be using reference points from my experience, which is from my 2014 SRT8. I'll start the pros off of owning an older V8, and probably the most obvious pro about owning an older V8 is the amount of fun that you can have with a vehicle like this. As I mentioned, this is the SRT8 with the 6.4 liter Hemi, which puts out 485 horsepower and 485 foot-pounds of torque. Now, I could sit here and go into whole detail about this. However, you don't want to sit through an 8-hour YouTube video. So to boil it down, driving a car like this is extremely fun. Another pro about owning a used V8 is actually the gas mileage. That was the one thing that I was kind of dreading when I got this vehicle, was the gas mileage. I thought going into this I was going to have to sell 7 arms, 3 legs, 2 testicles, 3 brain cells, and a pinky toe just to fill this thing up all the time. However, the gas mileage isn't horrid in this vehicle. In the same setting that I drove my Charger in, where I was getting around 17 to 20 miles to the gallon, I am getting around 16 to 18 miles to the gallon driving this thing. And the only time I had seen it go drastically low was during the winter time when my motor was having issues and it dropped to around 14 to 13 miles to the gallon, which was not a very good time. And on the highway, this thing actually does pretty damn good. This vehicle on the highway trips that I have taken it in usually averages around 23 to 25 miles to the gallon. And I had even at one point saw it estimate that it was getting 27 miles to the gallon. While it isn't the greatest gas mileage, it also is not the worst by any means. Another pro about owning an older / used V8 is going to be the cost. Now, a big reason why a lot of people don't buy newer V8s is because they cost a redonkulous amount, especially in today's economy. And the majority of the time, you can find used or older V8s, much like the one that I have right here, in the same bracket as some of the newer V6s. Hello everybody, 'tis I from the future, editing this video. I realized while editing this video that I didn't go super in depth on my explanation for this, so here I am to elaborate further. What I mean by finding them in the same bracket is obviously price-wise. A lot of the newer V6s are going to run in the range of about the mid to high 20s, some of them even going into the low 30s. And of course, when I say that, I mean thousands. And this is usually the range that you can find an older V8 model in. For example, the SRT8 model that I have was in the mid 20s range. And that vehicle has the 6.4 liter Hemi in it, which is the exact same motor that they put in the Scat Packs. And a lot of the newer Scat Packs will be running anywhere between the $50,000 to $60,000 range. So technology really isn't that much of a bother, which, I mean, the technology isn't even lacking in some of these older V8 models. It's just a little bit outdated. And all you care about is the performance of the vehicle. Then it definitely is kind of a steal of a deal looking at these older V8 models, which will put out the exact same power as some of the newer models, but only be a third of the price. Now we will go on to the cons of owning an older / used V8, starting off with the first one, which obviously is the fact that it's used. Now this is very subjective to whom owned the V8 before you did. However, a lot of people that buy these V8s use them like they're V8s. And sometimes a lot of these vehicles don't really get left in great condition. I was lucky enough to find this particular SRT8 in really good condition. However, not every vehicle has the same story as this one, and there are a lot of V8s out there that have been fucking trashed. Like I said, that is a pretty subjective thing, and it all comes down to whom owned it before you did. But one of the most common things that is an issue is the fact that people use these V8s like V8s. So the next person that gets it will get the repercussions. And the next con that I'll point out about owning a vehicle like this is obviously going to be the cost of gas. Most of these V8 motors will be taking 91 or above octane only, which costs a lot more than just regular 87. And that could obviously hurt the bank just a little bit more. And you will be finding a lot of fun at the gas pump when you gotta put 18.5 gallons of 92 octane in one of these suckers. And that is going to pretty much do it for the cons that I have to say about owning an older V8. Now to the ultimatum of the question at hand. Should you buy a newer V6 or an older used V8? In my opinion, of course. In my opinion, I would honestly still, with all the cons that could come with owning an older / used V8, still take an older / used V8 over a newer V6. Now, people in the market for these kinds of sports cars or muscle cars obviously are buying them with some intention of using them like a sports car or a muscle car. Now, with an older / used V8, there will be obstacles that you have to face no matter what, whether or not it was owned by an older couple that stuck it in their garage and kind of used it as their trophy car, or it was owned by somebody like me. No matter what, there will be repairs that you will have to make with a vehicle that is slightly older. However, once those repairs are done, I still firmly believe, in my opinion, that it is a lot more worth it to own a vehicle like this over a newer V6 that may not have as many problems. Anyways, that is going to do it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, these are just my opinions personally, having owned a newer V6 and an older V8. If you like this video, then please do leave a like on this video. And if you feel like it, please do subscribe to the channel as well. It helps me out a lot. I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace.